The last time I came to the floor to speak in July to talk about Zika, there were 3,667 people in the United States and U.S. territories that had Zika infections. Included in that number, 599 pregnant women. As of late last week, that number has skyrocketed. 17,000 people infected with Zika in the United States and its territories, a fourfold increase over the 7 weeks that we left for recess. It included 1,595 pregnant women. I would say to the Republican majority, you've been warned by the President, by public health experts, and others that your failure to respond to the President's request for resources would endanger people living in the United States and its territories, and especially pregnant women. And yet, the Republican leadership has refused the President's efforts to provide the resources necessary to fight this deadly Zika virus. The numbers are devastating, but not surprising. It was last February, 7 months ago, the President asked Congress for $1.9 billion in emergency funding so that public health experts would have the resources they needed to fight Zika. Here we are, almost 7 months later, 200 days later, and Congress still has refused to provide the resources necessary to protect American families from this virus. This is a disgrace. It is an outrage. Our federal health agencies, including the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, have been doing everything they can to move money around within their agencies to try to make do in this fight against Zika. They're out of options. Last week, Dr. Frieden, director of the CDC, said, and I quote, "The cupboard is bare. Basically, we're out of money, and we need Congress to act to allow us to respond effectively." Mr. President, Dr. Frieden came to see me before the recess. He sat in my office. He was incredulous. He said, "You mean you're going to leave without Congress responding to the President's call for emergency funding to fight Zika?" And I said, "Unfortunately, that's the case." And that's what happened. And for 7 weeks, we have said to the public health leaders across America that the Republican-led Congress will not respond to the President's call for emergency funds. It didn't have to be this way. In May, the Senate approved a bipartisan compromise funding bill supported by 89 senators, including many who've come to the floor on the Republican side. It was negotiated by Senators Blunt, Murray, and others. It provided $1.1 billion in emergency funding to fight Zika, not what the President asked of $1.8, but $1.1 billion. Instead of voting on this bipartisan measure after it passed the Senate with 89 votes, the House Republican leadership put forth an inadequate proposal to fight Zika in the range of $622 million, about a third of what the President asked for. Then, when that bill was a non-starter, the House Republicans decided to double down. So they drafted the special House Republican Zika funding bill. What an outrage. This bill included a litany of poison pill riders that the House Republicans knew didn't have a chance in the United States Senate. They threw in a provision, listen to this, at a time when women, fearful of becoming pregnant and infected by the Zika virus, were seeking family planning advice and counseling. The House Republicans threw in a provision on the Zika funding bill to block funding for Planned Parenthood. They knew that with no vaccine available to protect these women, women's health clinics like Planned Parenthood were on the front lines of giving women who faced a pregnancy the opportunity to delay that pregnancy so they wouldn't be infected and give birth to a child with serious problems. Did they stop there? No, the House Republicans had more. They threw in provisions to undermine the Environmental Protection Agency on key provisions of the Clean Water Act. Then they added provisions to cut the Affordable Care Act funds to reduce the opportunity in Puerto Rico, which is ground zero in our territories, to fight the Zika virus. Essentially, the Republicans are putting red meat for the right wing of their party ahead of protecting the people living in America, our territories, and especially pregnant women from this public health threat. No surprise, this hyper-partisan bill coming out of the House went nowhere. Now, Senator McConnell comes to the floor and blames the Democrats. Blames the Democrats after the Republicans put in the provision to block funding for family planning at Planned Parenthood. Let me be clear. Democrats were committed from the start to fund this effort that the President asked for at $1.9 billion so that we had the resources to fight this public health emergency. The Republicans decided to play politics with it. I've been in Congress for a while, in the House and in the Senate. We've had a lot of disasters, natural disasters and others. Time and again, we put party aside to respond to the real needs of the American people. That's all changed. With the arrival of the Tea Party, with this new spiteful spirit that we see in the Congress, even a public health crisis like Zika has become a political football in this Republican-controlled Congress. When it became clear the Republicans were not going to approve the funding level the President asked for, we agreed to a compromise of $1.1 billion. This bipartisan bill had passed the Senate overwhelmingly, and the House, all it had to do was to approve that bill so that we could have provided the funding to fight Zika. They refused. I worry that my Republican colleagues are underestimating the threat that this virus poses. Local transmission of Zika has now occurred in Florida, with more than 35 Floridians contacting the virus without having traveled overseas. And for the first time ever, the first time in the history of our country, the Center for Disease Control is warning Americans that there are certain parts of the continental United States that are not safe to travel in. They're advising pregnant women to avoid neighborhoods in Miami, Florida. Mr. President, that's never happened before. When the President warned us in February of the danger of this crisis, did any of the Republicans who opposed him think that there would be parts of America that we would be advising Americans not to visit because of the danger of this public health crisis? Certainly, if they did, they would have paid closer attention to the President's request. During the past 6 months, we've discovered new and worse information about Zika. Here's what we know. Zika can be spread through sexual transmission. We also know women with Zika in their first trimester face a 13% chance that their baby will be born with microcephaly. And even if pregnant women don't show any signs of infection, the baby can be born with serious physical and neurological disorders. Researchers are also examining the links to other negative health outcomes. Eye infections that can lead to blindness, autoimmune disorders that can cause paralysis. And what about the impact of maternal stress on a baby? I can't imagine the anxiety that pregnant women must feel right now, especially in Florida, and looming crises in Texas, Louisiana, and certainly in Puerto Rico. If you call yourself a pro-life congressman or senator, wouldn't you want to do everything in your power to protect these babies from this elevated risk? In July, I met with fetal medicine specialists and community health leaders in Chicago who shared with me their fear about what parents were going to go through. Illinois has now had 47 cases of Zika, but with Chicago being a major transportation hub, hundreds of more pregnant women have sought care and advice from the providers and have undergone tests to make sure their babies are safe. I'm tired of the partisan games being played with the health of pregnant women and babies. But to date, that's exactly what's happened with this partisan response to this Zika crisis. It's time for this to stop.